Some mistakes are small, easily forgotten. Others are so catastrophic they reshape the world with ripples that echo through history. In the brutal theatre of war, where the stakes couldn't be higher, a single error in judgment, a moment of arrogance, a catastrophic miscalculation can lead to the death of millions and the fall of empires. These aren't just defeats, they're lessons written in blood, masterclasses in failure taught by some of history's most powerful leaders. Today, we're counting down 3 of the most disastrous military blunders in history. These are the moments where legendary commanders, blinded by ambition, made the one fatal choice that led to their own spectacular downfall. First up, a decision made on a muddy field in Belgium, a blunder that would seal an emperor's fate and end an era of endless war. By 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte was a living legend. He was the most feared military commander in Europe, a man who had brought the entire continent to its knees. After escaping his first exile, he returned to France for one last, desperate gamble, the 100 Days. The nations of Europe, completely fed up with his wars, formed the Seventh Coalition to stop him once and for all. Critically outnumbered, Napoleon knew his only chance was to strike before his enemies could unite their full strength against him. His plan was classic Napoleon, swift, aggressive, and designed to divide and conquer. He aimed to smash the 2 closest Allied armies, a British-led force under the Duke of Wellington and a Prussian army under Marshal Blucher, before they could link up. On June 16th, he defeated the Prussians at the Battle of Ligny and forced them to retreat. Believing the Prussians were shattered and running for home, he made his first big mistake. He sent a third of his army under Marshal Grouchy to chase them down, while he turned to deal with what he thought was the easier target, Wellington. Napoleon had a famously low opinion of his British opponent, dismissing him as a sepoy general who only had experience in colonial skirmishes. On the morning of June 18th, as his army faced Wellington's forces near the village of Waterloo, Napoleon was oozing confidence. But there was a problem. An overnight rainstorm had turned the battlefield into a sea of mud. His artillery, the pride of the French army, would be almost useless in the soggy ground. And here he made his second and most fatal error. Instead of attacking at dawn, Napoleon waited several hours for the ground to dry. He enjoyed a leisurely breakfast, convinced that Wellington was a bad general and the battle was as good as won. Those lost hours were a gift to his enemies. The Prussians, far from being defeated, had regrouped with grim determination and were now force-marching to Wellington's aid. When the battle finally kicked off around midday, the French attacks were ferocious. One of Napoleon's most famous commanders, Marshal Ney, led wave after wave of cavalry against the stubborn British infantry squares. But Wellington's army, holding a strong defensive ridge, simply refused to break. As the hours dragged on, Wellington was heard anxiously muttering, "Blucher or night!" Just as the French seemed to be on the very edge of victory, the first Prussian troops appeared on the flank. The tide turned decisively against Napoleon. His army, now trapped between 2 forces, collapsed and fled in a panic. The defeat was absolute. It marked the end of Napoleon's reign, the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and the complete destruction of his empire. His arrogance and his simple, disastrous decision to wait for the mud to dry had cost him everything. Coming in at number 2 is a campaign born from a mix of brilliant strategy and breathtaking arrogance, the Allied invasion of Gallipoli in 1915. By then, World War I had ground to a bloody stalemate on the Western Front. Looking for a way to break the deadlock, Britain's first Lord of the Admiralty, a man you might have heard of named Winston Churchill, championed a bold and ambitious plan, The idea was to knock Germany's ally, the Ottoman Empire, out of the war by seizing control of the Dardanelles Strait. This narrow waterway was the gateway to the Ottoman capital, Constantinople. Success would open a sea route to Russia, allowing the Allies to supply their struggling partner, and might even convince neutral Balkan states to join them. Churchill, so confident in the power of the Royal Navy, initially believed a fleet of battleships could force the strait all on its own. That was the first major miscalculation. The naval assault in March 1915 was a catastrophe. Undetected Ottoman mines and relentless cannon fire from the shore sank or crippled a third of the fleet, forcing a humiliating retreat. But instead of cutting their losses, the Allies doubled down on the blunder. The new plan? An amphibious invasion of the Gallipoli Peninsula to capture the forts by land. The planning was rushed and based on fatally flawed intelligence. The Allies completely underestimated the strength and determination of the Ottoman defenders. On April 25, 1915, British, French, and Anzac, Australian and New Zealand Army Corps soldiers landed on the peninsula's beaches. The result was pure chaos and carnage. At places like Anzac Cove, troops were put ashore in the wrong locations and forced to scale treacherous cliffs under withering fire from well-entrenched Ottoman soldiers, commanded by a then unknown but brilliant officer named Mustafa Kemal. Instead of a quick victory, the invasion bogged down into the exact same trench warfare it was supposed to avoid. For the next 8 months, Allied soldiers endured hell on earth, scorching heat, rampant disease like dysentery, and the constant threat of death. The campaign was a logistical nightmare. After suffering a staggering 250,000 casualties for zero strategic gain, the Allies finally admitted defeat. They evacuated in late 1915 and early 1916. Ironically, the withdrawal was the most successful part of the entire operation. The failure was a devastating blow to the Allies. For Winston Churchill, it was a political disaster that got him demoted and forced to resign. The shadow of Gallipoli would hang over his career for decades. For Australia and New Zealand, however, the immense sacrifice of their soldiers forged a powerful new national identity, a legacy of courage known as the Anzac spirit, which is honoured to this day. It's incredible how fast one bad decision can spiral out of control. If you're finding this deep dive into history's greatest failures fascinating, do us a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications too, so you don't miss our next exploration of history's most epic moments. And at the #1 spot, we have a mistake so monumental, it's arguably the single greatest military blunder in modern history: Adolf Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union. In June of 1941, Hitler was the master of Europe. He had crushed France in weeks and pushed the British off the continent. His only real enemy left was an isolated Great Britain. Yet driven by his fanatical ideology of obtaining Lebensraum, or living space in the East, he made the fateful choice to open a massive second front. On June 22, 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, a surprise invasion involving over 3 million soldiers. Hitler and his high command were blinded by hubris. They genuinely believed the Soviet Union was a rotten edifice that would come tumbling down with one good kick. They expected the war to be over in a few weeks, assuming the Red Army, weakened by Stalin's purges, would collapse instantly. This assumption led to a cascade of catastrophic failures. First, German logistics were completely unprepared for the sheer size of Russia. The army still relied heavily on horses, and the Soviet railway system used a different gauge. To make matters worse, the dirt roads turned into rivers of mud. During the autumn Rasputitsa, or quagmire season, supply lines stretched to the breaking point. Second, they fatally underestimated the Soviet will to resist. Despite suffering insane losses, the Red Army didn't break. Instead, it traded space for time, falling back and fighting with a stubborn ferocity that stunned the German troops. But the most infamous blunder was the total lack of preparation for the brutal Russian winter. Believing the war would be over by autumn, the German army wasn't even issued winter clothing. When the first snows fell and temperatures plunged to -30°C and below, disaster struck. Engines froze, lubricants turned solid, and weapons jammed. Frostbite alone caused over 100,000 casualties. German soldiers, still in summer uniforms, froze just miles from Moscow as their offensive ground to a halt. In early December 1941, the Soviets launched a massive counterattack with fresh Siberian divisions trained for winter war. It was Germany's first major defeat of the war. The failure of Barbarossa was the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. The invasion morphed into a brutal 4-year war of attrition that would consume more than 80% of all German combat casualties in World War II. The disastrous Battle of Stalingrad in 1942, where an entire German army was destroyed, became what many consider the undeniable turning point of the war in Europe. From that moment on, Germany was on a long, bloody retreat that ended in the ruins of Berlin. From the mud of Waterloo to the frozen fields of Russia, these stories all share one thing: the catastrophic consequences of arrogance. Whether it was Napoleon underestimating his opponents, Churchill underestimating his enemy's resolve, or Hitler underestimating an entire nation and its winter, these leaders all believed their will alone could conquer any obstacle. Their failures are a timeless and brutal reminder that in war, overconfidence can be a far more dangerous enemy than any army. Of course, history is filled with epic blunders. What did we miss? The Spanish Armada, Custer's last stand. Let us know which military disasters you think should have made the list down in the comments. We read every single one. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our other deep dives into history's most pivotal moments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.